right, so now that we got those notes taken care of, we should have a little bit better of an idea of the impact that these different groups in Mesopotamia left on history, right? A couple thousand years later, we're still talking about, the fact that the Sumerians were the first civilization, that the Akkadians were the first empire, Hammurabi's code, right? All this stuff has been a lasting legacy. But the only problem we have so far with the notes that we've taken is, honestly, they're a little bit messy, right? And hard to understand because these groups that were important in Mesopotamia kind of come and go, right? So the Sumerians were there first, and the Akkadians very quickly, the Assyrians, and there's the back and forth, and it's just really messy. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to make this a little bit more clear for ourselves by creating a timeline. Okay, so we're going to switch over to some slides, take a look at what exactly that means. So like I said, the way that we did these notes does make this a little bit messy and hard to follow who's in charge and who's the big dog in Mesopotamia at any given time. So I think that one way we can better keep track of these historical events and which group was the most important is by creating a timeline. Now you'll see here on the screen that we've got a definition. A timeline is a graphic representation of the passage of time as a line, right? I know it seems kind of silly to have the definition on here because it's basically just a line that represents time, but that's all right. So that's one tool that we as historians can use to make sure that we understand history and understand that events go in order. Okay, so what we're going to do first before we try to make our own timeline for Mesopotamia is we're going to take a look at a few examples. So let's go ahead and take a look at example number 1 together. So if we look at example number 1, first of all, let's break down what we're seeing. You notice, first of all, that you've got dates going in descending order, meaning as we go this way from left to right, you see that the numbers are going down, right? Which is kind of odd to us. It's something that we're not used to if we're not looking at ancient history, because as we know, right, this year is 2020, next year is going to be 2021, we're going up. Well, remember that time, when we're looking back in the past like this, we're talking about an era called BC, or before the Common Era. So essentially what happens is as you continue this timeline from left to right, eventually you're going to get to year 1 BC, and then the next year is going to be 1 AD, and then AD starts going up. So when we're in the BC, before the Common Era, we're actually counting down. Okay, so we're still going left to right, just like we read, just the way that we think for the most part. So with that in mind, you can see that the first group on the timeline is the Sumerians, which matches up with everything that we've been saying. And you'll also notice that they are the ones that have the longest running time here, and they were pretty much all by themselves for a long time. Okay, so all this is matching up with the stuff that we've discussed. But a couple of things I want to point out here that are good, right? So some good things, I think the dates are pretty clearly laid out, right? You can kind of understand how this is broken up into chunks of time. I also like the fact that it's color coded, right? You can see that the Sumerians are this like grayish blue color, the Babylonians are this yellow, and it makes it very clear, right? And you can also see, because of how clear that makes it, that there's even a slight overlap here where the Sumerians were around when the Akkadians were around. And so as we make our timeline, I think color coding is something that could really help us, right? Now, what's something that's not so useful about this timeline? Well, in this particular timeline, you notice that it really just says the names of the different groups. It doesn't really say anything that's going on. So this is definitely a very generic timeline. And I think for us, it might be more helpful to have some more specific things that are going on our timeline. So let's take a look at some other ones here real quick. This one as well is kind of generic, right? So you can see it does mention the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Assyrians, all these folks that we've discussed before. And I like the fact, I think the good stuff here is we've got some images, and that's always helpful, right? We're very visual creatures, human beings, right? So seeing pictures is a good thing. And you'll also notice that this actually helps us out a little bit when we look right here, right? This is when the Common Era starts. So think as you go past this point on the timeline, Since it says 1 AD right here, you know it would be 2, then 3, then 4, all the way up to the fantastic year that 2020 has been. Okay, so I think that's good that it gives us that reference point. But for me, one thing that's kind of confusing is, they've got date ranges in here, like 4000 to 2300 BC, but then it only connects to one spot on the timeline. And I don't think that really makes too much sense. So I think that could definitely be cleaned up. Okay, so good images, good, a reference to the Common Era, not so good, date ranges that only go to one spot on the timeline. Also, it's all blue, it's all the same color for each of these, and I think that that's something that maybe they could have differentiated, meaning show the difference between the different groups with different colors. Okay, let's look at one more example. Now this one is definitely more specific, so we're looking at a smaller chunk of time on this timeline, but there's some really good stuff here. So first of all, we can see that, there we go, get my marking tool. You can see that they have very clear dates on this timeline of the things that are going on, right? So if you wanted to learn specifically, this one focuses on the Babylonian Empire, you can read about these specific events and know when they happened. So in 1792 BC, Hammurabi became the king. In 1750, Hammurabi dies, right down here. So you can see that it's very sequential. It's very much this happens, then this happens, then this happens, and this happens. And I think that's really good because that helps us tell the story that is history, right? When we can go, this happened and then this happened. So that's definitely a big plus. There's some detail. They're very clear on the dates. I think that's really good. The only thing maybe I don't necessarily like is, maybe you could box these out or something, kind of like the last one did, that would keep these separate from one another. Other than that, I think this is a pretty good timeline. All right, now, I'm sure you guys have lots of comments as well on some things that maybe you thought were good and could be better on these timelines. And that's awesome because what we're going to do next is we're going to take a large amount of textual information, meaning a whole bunch of words, and we're going to try to organize it in a way that'll be easier to understand. And the way that we're going to organize it is by making a timeline. So we're going to make a timeline of key historical events that happen in Mesopotamia. And before we do that, I think the most important question we should answer is, what should we do to make ours, meaning our timelines, good, right? So a couple of things that I think we mentioned, or I mentioned at least, and I hope you guys were thinking the same way from those other ones, is I think that things like clearly labeled dates, sorry for my messy finger writing here on the screen, not quite handwriting. I think having clearly labeled dates is something that can make it good. I hope you guys would agree with me that on that first one, the color coding was good stuff. And I think that is worth bringing into creating our own timelines. And then the last thing I think is just making sure that the timelines are neat, or if you prefer to use the word tidy, I think that works too, right? If we were to go back and look at these, we can see this. The ones that have the best information are ones like this, right? That have very clearly labeled dates, versus this one that is kind of generic, right? This one will be very helpful for us to steal the color coding from to make sense of our maps. And just in general, the ones that are the neatest and tidiest, like this one, as much as I like, it's not super neat and tidy, so it could definitely be cleaned up. Okay, so let's take a look at our assignment and what we're gonna try and apply these three guidelines to. Let's take a look at that assignment now. Okay, so first of all, we have this document, which is the one called Important Mesopotamian Events. This is the textual document that I was talking about. Notice that it is all text, right? So we've got the dates with a description of what happened at those dates. Now, this is all well and good, and it is in chronological order, meaning that the oldest thing comes first, and then the next, and then the next, right? So in the passage of time, it is in order. But I think this is still just kind of a big, for lack of a better word, a big block of text, right? And it's not exactly easy to understand. So what we're going to do is we're going to take all of these events, including what's on the back page here, or most of them at least, and we're going to fill it into a timeline. Here is your homework assignment. This is the timeline for Mesopotamia. So if you read the directions up at the top, it says that you're going to use that other document, the textual timeline, to add events found for the below dates. So for every one of these dates that you see on the timeline, you're going to have to find what the event that happened was, and you're going to have to add it in. And then you also notice in the instructions it said you must add at least 2 other events to the timeline that you think are noteworthy. So go ahead and look through that timeline, see which ones you think are noteworthy and worth putting into here, and add those in. Okay, so you're going to do this on Notability. So it'll be pretty easy to move stuff around and draw lines and stuff. So I think you guys can do that to effectively hit our 3 guidelines that we said were going to be good. So remember the 3 things we said that would help would having clearly labeled dates, which the dates that are on here are already labeled. So as long as you add the dates for the 2 you add, that'd be great. To color code it. In the instructions it says to color code it, and that's why we have a color key down in the bottom left corner. And try to keep these neat and tidy. If you do that, when you go to submit this assignment after you completed it, I'm sure you're going to get all your points. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Otherwise, go ahead and rock and roll, get this timeline completed, and get it turned in. So there we go, guys. There's your assignment for making a timeline of the important Mesopotamian events. Make sure you get the work done. You follow those 3 guidelines, clearly label the dates, color code, and keep it neat and tidy. And make sure you submit it before the due date, which is before next class, okay? And now after you're done with the homework and you've submitted it, also be sure that you go ahead and take that Google Form exit survey. Remember, that's how you get credit for being in class, okay? If you don't do that, you're marked as absent. Even if you get all the work done, you'll still be considered absent, okay? So please make sure you do that and let me know if you have any questions. You can email me, send me a message on Schoology, or jump onto our regularly scheduled Google Meets, okay? I appreciate you guys, and I'll hear from you soon, and hopefully we get to see each other soon. See ya.